In the early hours of Sunday, 31st of August 1997, news of the death of Princess Diana shook the world. Her and her lover, Dodi Al-Fayed, had been killed in a car crash as they sped through a Paris tunnel during the night. The driver of the car, Henry Paul, was also killed, and Diana's bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, was seriously injured. At first, the cause of the accident seemed straightforward enough. In an attempt to shake off the paparazzi who were pursuing the couple on motorcycles, the driver had taken the car down into the tunnel just a little too fast and had ended up smacking into one of the pillars inside it. But then questions began to be asked. Why was the car travelling so fast? Had Henry Paul been drinking? If so, why would he have been allowed to drive the car of Britain's #1 celebrity, Princess Diana, whose doomed marriage to the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, had generated pages of speculation and scandal in the worldwide press for over a decade? Why had the lights in the tunnel and the security cameras apparently failed just before the crash? Why had it taken so long for Princess Diana, who was still alive after the crash, to be taken to hospital by ambulance? And after her death from cardiac arrest in the hospital, why was her body immediately embalmed before a post-mortem could be undertaken? Had she been pregnant? Was it possible that MI6 and the British royal family wanted her and her lover, son of one of Britain's richest businessmen, Mohammed Al-Fayed, out the way? Had the princess's indiscretions, her affairs, her criticism of the royal family, her increasingly eccentric behaviour earned her enemies in high places? Al-Fayed Sr. claimed that the couple had been murdered, that they had been planning to marry, and that the British establishment had decided that it was time to get them out the way. At first, Al-Fayed's claim was seen as a paranoid, but time went on and more anomalies in the case surfaced. The theory began to seem less outlandish. Soon, others began to be convinced that this was no ordinary accident, but a case of foul play. Initially, the press reported the tragic event as a car crash caused by the fact that Henry Paul, the driver, had simply made a mistake. But it began to emerge that Paul, a security officer at the Ritz Hotel, was an experienced and careful driver who had taken driving courses in the past. Not only this, but the car was only travelling at about 60 or 70 miles per hour, not at 120 as at first been reported. Next, there were allegations that Paul had been drunk at the wheel, but security cameras at the hotel showed that he was acting in a perfectly normal way minutes before taking the wheel. Moreover, he was unlikely to have been drinking when on call to such important hotel guests as Princess Diana and Dodi Al-Fayed. Later, it was found that even before they took samples of his blood, the police had in fact announced that Paul was drunk. So, if the car was not going too fast and Paul was not drunk, why had the accident happened? Conflicting reports by some witnesses told of a car blocking the way so that Paul had to turn off his normal route into the tunnel and of cycles ramming the car as it travelled along, causing it to swerve. Some suggested that Paul had been in the pay of MI6, that he had been hired to kill Princess Diana and Dodi, and that something had gone wrong at the last minute. So he ended up killing himself as well. What was odd, and is still unexplained, is why Dodi asked Paul to drive the couple home instead of using his usual driver, Philippe Junot. According to some reports, all the lights in the tunnel went out shortly before the car approached, and the security cameras in the tunnel also failed. On this evidence, a theory has been constructed that Paul was used as a dupe and that the French authorities deliberately arranged for the car to crash, this killing the inmates. It has even been suggested that Rhys Jones was somehow in on the plot because he survived, protected by his safety belt when Princess Diana and Dodi were not wearing theirs. However, his involvement is somewhat implausible. Deliberately travelling in a car that is destined to have a fatal accident seems a little too risky, and a strategy even for a man trained by the Parachute Regiment, one of the toughest regiments in the British Army. What does emerge as odd, however, is how the French authorities responded at the scene of the accident. In the immediate minutes after the crash, Diana appeared not to be seriously harmed. It later emerged that she was suffering from internal bleeding, but to the off-duty doctor who arrived first on the scene, Frederick Millies, said she did not appear to be in a fatal condition. As she clearly needed medical attention, an ambulance was called, but strangely, it took over an hour to get to the hospital. It even stopped on the way for 10 minutes. Afterwards, it was explained that the ambulance had stopped in order to administer a shot of adrenaline to the princess, and that it had travelled slowly to avoid jolting her. However, many remain unconvinced by this, and they still cannot understand why Princess Diana was taken to a hospital some distance away, when there were several nearby that could have attended to her. After all, this was no ordinary car crash victim. This was Diana, the Princess of Wales, one of the most famous and recognisable women on the planet. Not only that, but important evidence was also cleared away from the scene of the accident immediately after the victims had been taken to the hospital. Within just a few hours, the tunnel had been cleaned and disinfected and was soon open to traffic once again. In normal circumstances, one would have expected the authorities to have sealed off the tunnel and have sifted through the evidence in order to find out exactly what had happened. But in this case, they did not, which was curious. Once Diana had died in the hospital, the British royal family reacted oddly to the news. They reportedly sent an emissary to the hospital to retrieve any valuable family jewellery on the body. They then ordered the hospital to embalm the body right away, thus making it impossible for a post-mortem to be carried out. In particular, it was not possible to ascertain whether the princess had been pregnant or not. She had apparently confided to Dr. Millies that she was. When the press learned of the tragedy, the royal family were roundly condemned for not issuing an official statement and for failing to fly the palace flags at half-mast. To this day, new theories are still pointing to the possibility that the top ranks of the British establishment joined in a conspiracy to kill Diana, Princess of Wales, because she had not only become an embarrassment to the royal family, but also to the state in general. Other theories have also emerged, one of which is that she faked her own death so that she could disappear. This avoiding the media circus that followed her everywhere she went. Perhaps we will never know the full truth. What is clear, though, is that the circumstances of her death were not as straightforward as they first appeared. Also, many of those who dealt with the accident, whether in Britain or in France, were guilty of incompetence, if not murder. In 2005, the official inquiry into Diana's death was reopened in France.